All right, first we'll hear a few remarks from Mr. Zaidi, and once he's done, Mr. Podesta will take the floor. After that, Gabby Dreyfus from IGSD will introduce and moderate our panel discussion. All right, Mr. Zaidi, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, it's wonderful to be with everyone today. Later, actually, this afternoon, we're hosting at the White House a convening on super pollutants in partnership with John and with the SPEC team, bringing people together around the need to tackle the emissions from methane, from hydrofluorocarbons, and from N2O that drive the warming that we are seeing in such a substantial fashion at this moment in time, and for which we have the solutions at our disposal to really get after the challenge and create in the bargain a ton of opportunity for U.S. industry as we move out. I know today's gathering this morning, and grateful to the conveners, to climate advisors, Asia Society, and others, is focused on industrial sector N2O. But I want to just do a quick drive-by of the broad approach that we're taking as the U.S. government to tackle this source of pollution, as we have in hydrofluorocarbons, where today, thanks to the work of all of you and the president's leadership, we now have not only the AIM Act on the books designed to knock out HFCs, but the Kigali Amendment, the first treaty through the United States Senate that is an environmental treaty in decades. On methane, we've taken in just the last year over 100 actions to tackle methane pollution, and we've taken a broad approach, bringing industry in, bringing labor in, and unlocking the economic opportunity associated with taking on methane. And one of the things we've learned is in this journey that partnerships, coalitions, voluntary measures, standard setting, tax credits, loan guarantees, grants, we got to bring the whole suite of action to invigorate the innovation that's needed, to invigorate the infrastructure build out that's needed to take on these challenges. Last week, I was in Pennsylvania, where I got to meet with some of the grantees of the $19.5 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act to tackle emissions from the agriculture sector. And better reception than this. And, you know, very enthusiastic folks who are seeing the value of taking not only CO2 and methane out, but also managing N2O on a voluntary basis through conservation innovation grants that I think will come to define how the sector approaches N2O in a serious and meaningful way. In transportation, we have in the United States of America been able to reduce N2O emissions by 50% since 1990, in large part propelled by regulatory action through the Environmental Protection Agency, which just finalized recently another round of standards for both light-duty vehicles and heavy-duty vehicles, which really drive some of the emissions in the space. We know, especially when we take a look at N2O, that that is a problem coming out of older, bigger, heavier vehicles. That's why part of the infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, the historic climate legislation, is aimed at making sure we turn over that old and heavy fleet to cleaner vehicles. Good for public health, good for our economy, and good not only for CO2, but also for N2O. In wastewater, we're also taking this on. Folks may not know this, but in the last year, the Department of Energy got 28 grants $28 million in 10 grants out to pilot technology that I think can get scaled very rapidly across the United States. And that's associated with the management of N2O in wastewater treatment facilities, capturing some of that super pollutant and making sure that the wastewater facilities, which represent about 6% of the problem, can be part of our phase out of this super pollutant. And of course, industrial N2O, which is what we're here to talk about, with a principal focus on thermal and catalytic reduction and getting those technologies into deployment into heavy industry. John will, I'm sure, speak to this in greater detail, but we've had a number of programs as an administration that have helped, I think, propel progress. Obviously, our national labs have been very much at the forefront of pioneering the advances in catalysts that I think help drive down the costs in this space. And then more recently, just in April, the tax credits, the 48C allocated tax credit going to a company in Texas that employs 1,000 folks and now can produce the polymer that they produce without putting N2O into the atmosphere. When we look at the climate crisis and the challenges that we face, when we think about the abatement costs and the willingness to pay from especially folks who are now helping set up and scale up a direct air capture industry, hundreds of dollars a ton. When we look at the social cost of carbon, which the latest science shows we may have underestimated by an order of magnitude because of the extreme heat that we're seeing in our communities, that context in the backdrop and in the forefront, a set of technologies and advances that can be deployed at scale at maybe $1, maybe a fraction thereof a ton. That's a pretty enticing opportunity. And I couldn't be more grateful for the opportunity for the US to play an important role in pushing forward the momentum behind this and to translate that hopefully into global momentum. And if there's anyone who can help us translate that into global momentum, it's the president's leader and chief diplomat on all climate matters, John Podesta. So I think I just hand it over to him.
Thanks, Ali. And he's a great partner. So it's a pleasure to share the podium with him. I want to thank Josh and Climate Advisor, the Asia Society Policy Institute, Gabby and IGSD for bringing everybody together. I'll give a little more context and talk a little bit more about China than Ali did. I do want to do 2 shout outs of my colleagues from SPEC. Rick Duke is here, and you'll hear from him in a minute. And Claire Henley is here, who has really championed the work in this space. I think it's fair to say, as Ali noted, that since day one, President Biden and Vice President Harris have treated the climate crisis as the existential threat that it is, and that we're seeing play out across the world. They knew that to get this problem under control, we needed a whole of government and a whole of economy approach. And that's why the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest investment in climate action in not just the history of the United States, but the history of the world, tackles every emitting sector: power, buildings, transportation, industry, agriculture, and forestry, as Ali noted. Similarly, we've worked to tackle the full range of greenhouse gases because, as this group knows well, maybe the public doesn't know well, but this group, I think, knows well. If you're only looking at CO2, you're only looking at half of the problem. Super pollutants like methane, HFCs, and nitrous oxide cause the other half of climate change that we are experiencing today. It's why President Biden and Vice President Harris have rallied the world to tackle super pollutants while accelerating domestic action to reduce our own emissions. Later today, as Ali noted, we're hosting a White House summit on super pollutants, which will cover work on several greenhouse gases. A major focus will be on nitrous oxide, which we are here to discuss this morning because it's nearly 300 times more powerful than CO2. It can last in the atmosphere for up to a century. to warm our planet, and it's damaging to public health by depleting ozone and increasing risk of skin cancer. We're convening a group of companies and international organizations to discuss barriers and next steps to slash nitrous oxide pollution, and we're making new announcements that change America's trajectory on tackling N2O. As of this year, Ascend Performance Materials, the largest producer of adipic acid in the United States, has virtually eliminated nitrous oxide emissions at their Florida facility. Congratulations to Phil McDivitt and your entire team for this incredible accomplishment. And ClimeCo, the largest developer of industrial N2O abatement projects in the United States, is announcing new projects coming online early next year that will cut N2O emissions at 3 facilities by 95%. Congratulations to Bill Flederbach and the whole ClimeCo team. Thank you for this exciting announcement and your continued leadership on reducing industrial N2O emissions in the U.S. By early next year, these new actions, coupled with recent steps by U.S. industry, would reduce overall U.S. industrial emissions of nitrous oxide by more than 50%. In addition, we're taking new steps to better understand super pollutants in the atmosphere. Today, NOAA announced an agreement with United Airlines to equip a Boeing 737 with instruments to measure greenhouse gases, including nitrous oxide, especially above large metropolitan areas. We're very excited about that partnership. As these announcements show, and as you've heard from Ali, we have a lot to be proud of in tackling non-CO2 greenhouse gas emissions domestically. But we can make the biggest difference by leveraging domestic action to catalyze more progress globally. And to do that, we need to focus on China, as this group is doing. Together, the U.S. and China account for 80% of global industrial N2O emissions. 2/3 of that 80% comes from China. To put that in perspective, nitrous oxide emissions from the PRC alone exceed the total emissions of all greenhouse gases from Thailand. Reducing these emissions is cost-effective. Indeed, it's one of the most cost-effective ways of reducing emissions. The EPA finds that about 80% of industrial N2O abatement is available for under $20 a ton. It's why cutting nitrous oxide pollution and other super pollutants is a core component of U.S. engagement with China on climate. This engagement has yielded, in our view, real results. Last year at Sunnylands, the joint statement negotiated by Secretary John Kerry and Minister Xie Zhenhua included a major new commitment by the PRC to include all greenhouse gases in their next nationally determined contribution under the Paris Agreement. That's the first time that non-CO2 gases were part of China's stated climate ambition. In May, I was pleased to welcome my Chinese counterpart, Liu Zhenmin, to Washington to continue our climate work together. I'll be headed to China later this year to continue that negotiation. But non-CO2 pollutants, including nitrous oxide, were a central focus of our discussions. During our meetings, both sides welcomed the call in the COP28 global stocktake decision for countries to submit on time, that is by February 2025, on time 2035 nationally by February of 2025. They have to submit on time 2035 nationally determined contributions that are economy-wide, that are aligned with 1.5 degrees Celsius, and cover all greenhouse gases. The United States intends to meet its commitment to do that, and we both committed to co-host, both the U.S. and China agreed to co-host a second methane and non-CO2 greenhouse gases summit at COP29 in November. We need to keep up this international engagement at the same time that we keep slashing N2O emissions here at home through every possible avenue. We encourage more private sector commitments like the ones being announced today, and we see the promise of high intensity carbon markets to cut N2O emissions in both the US and China. At the end of May, the Biden-Harris administration, I think some of you saw this, released a set of principles on responsible development of high integrity voluntary carbon markets, or VCMs. These principles made clear that with the right incentives and guardrails to ensure ambitious and credible climate action, high integrity VCMs can be an important tool in our climate toolbox and provide important capital to get on with the project of reducing emissions. It's not often that we find ourselves with an affordable and relatively straightforward way to eliminate emissions equivalent to tens of millions of cars on the road. Cutting industrial nitrous oxide pollution is that opportunity. So I think we need to seize it together. I want to thank again the conveners of this meeting to really focus on the joint effort to get those nitrous oxide industrial emissions down in the US and China. And with that, I think I'm turning it back to you, Gabby. Thanks.
Thank you so much to John Podesta and Ali Zaidi for teeing up this conversation on the potential for this real lever of reducing industrial nitrous oxide to deliver results that we need to slow warming and address the climate crisis that we're facing. So I'm Gabrielle Dreyfus, or Gabby, with the Institute for Governance and Sustainable Development, where I serve as chief scientist. As we've heard, we are experiencing the warming today, so it is really incumbent on us that we tackle not only the carbon dioxide, but also the other super climate pollutants that are contributing half of the warming we are experiencing. And so we're going to jump straight in to the science. So hold on to your seats. This is going to be fun. We've got Professor Jianxin, who's a professor from the College of Environmental Sciences and Engineering at Peking University, who's going to show us some of the data coming out on the industrial N2O emissions from China and tell us a little bit more about why this N2O is something that is so important, both for climate, but also for ozone protection. He has conducted research on the management of halocarbons. We heard a little bit about this with the HFCs and the Kigali Amendment before, one of the first really big global environmental crises that we addressed through the Montreal Protocol, and now with Kigali Amendment to deliver about half a degree of avoided warming by the end of century. And so I think without further ado, he has a lot of other laureates, as do all of our speakers. But I'm going to move on quickly. And we have a pre-recorded presentation, but Professor Hu is online with us and will participate in the Q&A. Should you have questions? Are we ready to go?
Thank you for inviting me to attend this meeting. My topic is emissions and abatement potential of N2O from industrial sector in China. N2O is greenhouse gases. It's also ozone depleting substance. Based on different assessment report, the GWP for N2O is around 300, and the ozone ODP is about 0.017. It's similar to the HCFC 141b. N2O emission data is quite well reported by the Chinese government. We will see this is the government reported data. You will see the historic data from 1994 and very recently data. The industrial process emission of the sector is around 500,000 tons is by substance. And among these 5,000 tons, 80% is from the adipic acid production. It's quite concentrated. Additional to the government report, there is a very new scientific paper just published recently. You will see this is the total Chinese N2O emission from natural and unnatural emission. in this paper is showing the industrial sector emission by year 2020 is about 500,000 tons. Is similar to the government report, but you will see there's a gap between the ADEGA data and the Chinese government data and the research paper data. This is almost 500,000 tons. Or we will see this is, at least we will see this is a potential reduction amount. Slightly different. This paper you will see increasing in the last few years, but we see the government data didn't see very quick increase. It's almost stable. Indeed, the N2O from the industrial sector, they are quite good reduction experience. Why do I say quite good? Because there are 43 companies, they did CDM project. At least they set up the technology, they know how to reduce N2O. We check the database, we see the total capacity of the CDM project is, you will see, is 77,000 tons. Compare the total emission, still there are some gap. Or we say some company, they understood this technology, some other company may not know very detailed. We also check the CDM project database on the UNFCCC website. We see that aggregate CER issued is only 26,000 tons. This is unlike the HFC 23 project in China. You know, HFC 23 project running almost full capacity reduction. But here, compare, you remember the capacity per annum is 77,000 tons, but the aggregate from year 2007 to year 2012 is only 26,000 tons. That's quite a bigger gap. We also from other paper know the emission reduction rate and the cost. And we also compare to the CDM project. We know that. And you will see the emission reduction averages at least 90%. Cost is relatively low. So we understood that the Chinese government already started quite a lot activity and the policy and the regulation building for reduced emission of greenhouse gases. N2O, we will see we already have a fundamental policy and regulation. So what more important we need to do is make a decision to the target to reduce the N2O emission from the industrial. So we are considered build a research, finish some assessment, especially for the government consideration. So we will review the historical data again and to do the estimation of future reduction potential, consider his abatement cost, and also climate benefit and ozone protection benefit.
So thank you very much, Professor Hu. That's lots of really exciting data. For those who aren't keeping score, gigagram is a kiloton in N2O mass units. So not to be confused with the megatons when we multiply by 300-ish for carbon dioxide equivalents using the 100-year conversion. Just want to make sure we're all on the same page here. Okay, cool. You got it? Awesome. Thank you. All right. So now I'd like to invite Dr. Zheng Ling, who is the Nat Simons Presidential Chair in China Energy Policy at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and an adjunct professor at the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics at the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Lin's research is focused on energy and climate policy, energy and emission pathways, with a focus on non-CO2 greenhouse gas reductions, electricity market and planning, low carbon economic transition, and appliance efficiency issues in China. My second love, appliance efficiency. Over to you, Dr. Lin.
Thank you, Gabby, for the lovely introduction. And good morning to everyone. And then also thank you, Gabby, and other colleagues for hosting this timely discussion on opportunities to reduce industrial N2O emissions in the US and China. My name is Jiang Lin. As Gabby mentioned, I'm at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and also at UC Berkeley. As other speaker has stated already, N2O is a powerful, long-lived greenhouse gas that is 273 times more potent than CO2 in trapping heat. It contributes to the equivalent of about 10% of global warming to date, and also contribute to depletion of ozone layer. China and the US jointly contribute to over 1/3 of global total in anthropogenic N2O emissions. As the leading global emitter of N2O, China has large emission both in its agriculture and industrial sector. Over the last decade, China has taken meaningful actions reducing N2O emissions in its agricultural sector by reducing fertilizer application. In contrast, mitigation in industrial N2O emission has stalled since the end of CDM project in China. Most of China's industrial N2O emissions is from adipic acid production. I think Professor Hu has shown some of the data on CDM project. What is really interesting is that those CDM projects demonstrate the cost of reducing industrial N2O emission is very low, just roughly below $1 per ton of CO2 equivalent in the adipic acid industry. Our analysis shows that by 2030, roughly 390,000 tons of N2O emission could be reduced in China at such low cost. In addition, that the big industry is very concentrated in China, with 11 manufacturers collectively contributing for roughly half the global production capacity. Initial analysis of more recent data indicates that about 60% of China's existing adipic acid production capacity now have the N2O abatement control equipment installed. However, without CDM credit as a financial incentive, the extent to which this N2O abatement technology are being operated in this plant is unclear. China has committed both in its domestic policy and bilateral discussion with the US to control non-CO2 greenhouse gases, including N2O. Most recently, there has been discussions on using CCER, China's voluntary carbon credit, to provide incentive for industrial N2O mitigation. The relatively concentrated nature of the Chinese adipic acid industry, coupled with availability of generally low-cost mitigation technology, present a ripe opportunity for the US and China to take concerted action to reduce the super climate pollutant. Thank you. I look forward for the discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lin. That was a very helpful transition explaining the potential and the opportunity in China, given the nature of the industry, the lessons learned from the CDM projects in terms of cost, the fact that I think I've heard correctly, 60% of the adipic acid production facilities have, in terms of capacity, installed abatement technologies. And so with that, I would like to transition to Rick Duke, who serves as the Deputy Special Envoy for Climate at the US Department of State. He is focused on encouraging major economies to define and implement ambitious emissions reduction targets under the Paris Agreement. And he also works through other forums and initiatives to accelerate global progress towards carbon-free energy and to advance complementary fast cooling strategies, including rapidly reducing methane emissions. With that, Rick.
Thanks, Gabby. Thanks everyone for making time to address the forgotten greenhouse gas. N2O, 5% of current emissions. If we don't act on N2O, including industrial N2O, it could easily be over a third of mid-century emissions because N2O is actually above expected growth rates in terms of IPCC projections, unlike everything else, which we're starting to break the back on. We're doing well on CO2. Finally, we're cutting deforestation in Brazil. Finally, we're starting to gear up and deal with methane. Finally, and we need to do the same thing on N2O, starting with industrial N2O, as other speakers have noted. And this has to happen in global context, and specifically it needs to happen in bilateral context with the US and China at the forefront, given that together we're 80% of the opportunity to cut industrial N2O. Really pleased to see that with actions that we're taking domestically through a combination of voluntary carbon markets and standard setting, that the US is already, in a matter of months, going to be over 50% reductions in industrial N2O in the US. We're going to just keep going from there. And so now the opportunity is to engage in China, where, as is the case in so many things, it's a 10x order of magnitude bigger prize in terms of industrial abatement in China. Up to 200 million tons a year of, by some measures, around $1 a ton abatement opportunity in China from industrial facilities by 2030. Just a huge prize. That's over 50 coal-fired power plants worth of emissions every year, year on year, that we could simply get at by working together to make it happen. And so I'm really proud to have been a part of supporting Special Presidential Envoy for Climate John Kerry in his work with Special Envoy Xie Zhenhua to realize the Sunnyland Statement last fall, in which, as you heard from John Podesta, the two countries committed that we would work together on this agenda, that we would both address all greenhouse gases in our 2035 Paris Agreement nationally determined contributions. I want to just be very clear. When China stepped up to make that commitment that they will address non-CO2 in their 2035 target, that was akin to putting a Russia-sized economy into the Paris Agreement in one go. Immensely consequential step, and that includes methane action, that includes F-gas action, tropospheric ozone opportunities, but it also includes industrial N2O. And so I'm really thrilled that we have everyone here paying attention to this opportunity. We are committed through the process of follow-through on the Sunnyland Statement to make sure that this stays high on the agenda and that we do everything we can together, as well as at home, to tackle this very low cost, very real, very quick, fast cooling strategy, if you will. And so really good to have a community building here to help us to get that job done. Looking forward to the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rick. That is really reminding us of the size of the prize and the opportunity, and that the will that is behind this. When the US and China work together, especially in the climate space, big things happen. So I'd like to now welcome Bill Flederbach, who is the president and CEO of ClimeCo and a trusted leader in the endeavor for global decarbonization. Since starting ClimeCo in 2009, he has grown the company rapidly from a pioneer, one of the early ones working on nitrous oxide abatement projects, to helping grow global businesses, governments, and environmental sponsors to develop large-scale carbon emission reduction efforts to address global environmental challenges. Bill, please.
All right, really nice to be here. I want to thank everyone for putting this together, climate advisors, and my liaison, actually, Claire Henley, has been amazing to prepare for the entire day. So thank you, Claire, for all the support in putting this together. And it's great to be around scientists. I'm actually, I am a climate scientist. I'm a meteorologist, climate scientist with an MBA in finance because I couldn't quite forecast the weather and the impacts on climate change long term. But I'm a Penn State meteorologist and climate scientist at Holmes. So a lot of what I heard today is like a multi-phased approach. Ali had mentioned, focus on wastewater, focus on exhaust emissions. Certainly, ClimeCo is always focused on the industrial component of nitrous oxide. John Podesta mentioned the administration support with respect to high integrity voluntary carbon markets and guardrails. And since our inception, it's always been about leveraging the voluntary carbon market to propel change on the industrial gas side. And we certainly focused in the United States first. And if we could show a full screen on that, I actually have an amazing number on the upper right-hand side of that PDF, but I will tell you what it is. And the number is 36.5 million. And what does 36.5 million mean? 36.5 million tons of CO2 equivalent reductions have been created by ClimeCo and our industrial gas partners in the United States so far. 36.5 million. So we started in the United States. We started with, I'm an old CDM guy. I was under the Kyoto Protocol. I was globetrotting around the world looking at CDM projects. And then I came back and we started ClimeCo in 2009, but I saw the technologies around nitric acid abatement. We talked about technologies, catalytic, thermal. Not all nitric acid plants are built alike. Every technology has to be deployed differently. So we became technology experts internationally. We brought that to the United States. Unfortunately, when the CER prices dropped significantly under the Kyoto Protocol, I lived that. A lot of the technologies were pulled. That's the sad part of the Kyoto Protocol, is that when the prices went down, some of the technologies were pulled or they weren't maintained. Certainly we saw that activity in China around adipic acid facilities, and the professor had mentioned that earlier. So what we wanted to do in 2009 was develop a robust protocol with all the lessons that we learned internationally. How do we develop a protocol that creates real, additional, and permanent, and no gaming, no production shifting? And we work with the Climate Action Reserve to create that nitric acid protocol. And that's a lot of the projects that you're seeing here over time, mainly nitric acid. Then we transitioned to adipic. So we saw, I lived the CER issues under adipic. I lived some of the issues around gaming. The CERs around adipic acid were called gray CERs at the end of the Kyoto Protocol, along with the HFC products, gray, because they were tainted. So we took all that experience and we wrote a protocol in the United States. And I'm really excited about it because one of the prices, and I could debate these prices because it all depends on the common denominator, because our baseline in China with our protocol, and I'll talk about that, is 90%. So we're holding China to a North American standard before you're able to create credits that really changes the marginal cost of abatement, significantly different than $1. So we can talk about that. But in the United States, for the adipic project at Ascend, which John had mentioned, we're creating 20,000 tons of reductions a day off of what they were already abating, which was already over 80%. So our technologies took them from 80 to 99.9% with redundant systems, which I think one of the professors said, instead of $1, it's $4 a ton marginal cost with redundant systems. I'd also debate that. But with redundancy, we're able to get 99.9% or roughly 6 million tons a year coming off of that project. Really exciting. So we are going to talk about some new projects that we're bringing online as well. I'm really excited. Actually, on this chart here, you'll see Dyno Nobel is an explosive plant that we have a project coming. And then Invista has taken our experiences around adipic acid, and they were abating 97% on average. We're taking them to like 99, but it's only through the voluntary carbon market. Everything that ClimeCo has done as a market maker stems upon a price of carbon. So without the voluntary carbon market, we would have never reduced 36.5 million tons so far. But the protocol allows us to take something that's already happening really positively and invest a little bit more money to do it even better. So I'm really excited about the conversations today. It all comes down to data transparency. We're moving into China right now as we speak. So I'm excited to announce, I can't say who our partners are yet because I haven't had the ability to release this, but we have 4 adipic acid projects signed in China. The potential emissions for those adipic acid projects are 60 million tons a year of CO2 equivalent. We have under contract, and we have the first project going on online in the 4th quarter of this year. So that's 60 million tons that we're tackling. But because we've created a 90% baseline,
only 6 million of those are creditable. Really changes our marginal cost. But our clients also want to use the first 90% to incorporate into their low carbon footprint. The other 9% that we're crediting, they can't, because we're selling that right to help fund the technologies, but we're really doing it right. So we really need to make sure that the market is willing to pay a premium for low carbon products. You know, General Motors, if they want to reduce their emissions in the vehicle and airbags are made of nylon 6,6, are they willing to pay a premium for low carbon nylon 6,6? That's an example. So once we start to get there, that's really going to help us fund these projects. But right now, we've set a really aggressive baseline in China, but we're really excited about the 4 lines we have under contract. A 5th line is about ready to be signed. By my numbers, that's 25% of the China market. So we're long adipic acid in China. We're long credits in China. Without a market, we're going to struggle. So a lot of our conversations today are about markets. How do we put a price on carbon so we can continue to finance these projects? Thank you so much.
Stay up here and I'll actually invite our other panelists, Rick Duke, also to join us here, pull up a stool, and we have a special additional guest to keep me and all of us honest on the science, our very own David Cantor. There we go. I got the bio right here. Is an associate professor of environmental studies at New York University and chair of the International Nitrogen Initiative. And so he is a true nitrogen expert who's been doing this for a while. From the cradle. There we go. We got, yeah, watch. All right. And also the co-chair of a forthcoming assessment that actually will give you David, would you like to tell us a little bit more about this forthcoming assessment? Just give us a preview.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and just really exciting. I mean, I've been working on N2O for 15 years since I was about 12 years old. So it's really nice to finally have a room this big to talk about it. So it's exciting. There is this forthcoming global N2O assessment, which is being sponsored by the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, which is an initiative under the UN Environment Program. It's scheduled to be launched first at New York Climate Week and then at COP29 and also at the MOP, the Montreal Protocol meeting of the parties. And I can share, it's currently under review right now, but I can share at least some preliminary findings that don't need to go beyond this room, but essentially confirming what we already know in the sense that nitrous oxide is the 3rd most important greenhouse gas, the largest remaining threat to the ozone layer. And we've started to evaluate, or we've continued evaluating the potential climate and ozone benefits of acting on N2O. And from an ozone perspective, especially and it's great that we're doing this super pollutant summit and considering methane as well, because N2O interacts with methane and CO2 in weird and wonderful ways, such that if we continue just to focus on CO2 and methane, but do nothing on N2O, from an ozone perspective, we will return likely to ozone levels that we haven't seen since before the Montreal Protocol was signed, right? Montreal Protocol being the most successful international environmental agreement ever. And from a climate perspective, you're looking at likely having to engage in an additional 200 billion tons of CDR, carbon dioxide removal, if you do not deal with N2O ambitiously, right? And that's not even talking about the avoided healthcare costs resulting from dealing with N2O in terms of avoided skin cancers, eye cataracts, obviously all the social benefits linked to the social cost of carbon. And then finally, N2O is part of, again, the wild and wonderful nitrogen cycle. And so when you lose nitrogen to the environment, it isn't just as N2O in terms of the climate and ozone impacts. It's also in nitrogen oxides, NOx. It's as ammonia, NH3, and it's as nitrate. And NOx and ammonia are 2 of the most important air pollutants out there. And air pollution now is the leading cause of premature mortality worldwide. And in fact, the avoided air pollution that we would get from ambitious N2O mitigation would save tens of millions of lives, if not more, which we will detail in that assessment. And then from nitrate is the leading cause of harmful algae blooms around the world, which has huge impacts on fisheries, links to colon cancer, etc. And so a integrated, ambitious approach to N2O would have multiple environmental co-benefits, with those benefits vastly outweighing the abatement costs, as we've already heard just from industrial N2O. And then the final thing linked to industrial N2O is that it is the key low-hanging fruit when it comes to nitrous oxide abatement. You look at the benefits, and we've been doing some work just looking in the United States. You're looking at in tens of billions of dollars in terms of benefits, climate and ozone benefits, and tens of millions of dollars in terms of the abatement costs. So it really is a low-hanging fruit, and we hope to highlight that and keep your eyes open for this N2O assessment coming very soon. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, David. So that was a special additional bonus information thrown at you. Yes, we can applause. All right. So we've thrown a lot of information at you. If you are not convinced that this is an awesome opportunity, ask your questions on so we can convince you. Or if you have other reasonable questions, I'm going to look around the room, see if there are any hands. I see a hand already right there, sir. Do we have a runner with a microphone? I see your hand second. Yep. Oh, this one?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I was going to say I can project too. Hi, my name is Brian. Thank you. I wanted to ask, these are great insights into the industrial effects of N2O, but could you please speak to some of the challenges that there are with some of the numbers that we saw in the graph up earlier? About 50% of those effects were coming in from the agricultural and the fertilizer sector in China. What are some of the challenges that the US and Chinese counterparts are facing with addressing some of the fertilizer pollutants in N2O?
Good morning. My name is Adele Adekun. I invest in different technologies. I was wondering, have you guys heard about fugims? They're creating nanotechnology to recarbonize carbon for few additives. And I mentioned that also. You mentioned something about NO2. So can you explain more about how new nanotechnology could possibly be used for NO2 production and better fuel economy?
So on the first question, thanks for the question. And I think this event and the focus of our discussion today is on industrial N2O because it is the low-hanging fruit. It's the easy place to start. It's something we must do. We are doing in the United States, and we're excited to do the work with China and globally to address and really get to near zero industrial N2O everywhere quickly, because it's a no-brainer. When it comes to agricultural N2O, it's a much more complicated set of questions. There's no simple way forward on agricultural N2O, but there are definitely solutions, and some of them we are already pursuing. So we have a substantial global fertilizer efficiency consortium that we launched a couple of years ago. I forget the exact numbers, but we mobilized over $100 million in grant support to do work on fertilizer efficiency and productivity, including through technologies like precision agriculture, in order to make sure that you're getting the right amount of fertilizer in the right place at the right time, not wasting it, not creating nitrogen runoff, and getting more productivity with less input cost. And that's a great way to address the agricultural N2O emissions. There are many other solutions coming down the pike, including and up to high-tech answers like on-site fertilizer production. It's exactly tailored to what's needed, when it's needed, and a whole set of other optimizations that are coming. We have the Agricultural Innovation Mission for Climate, AIM4C, that's doing related innovation work, and we have a tremendous opportunity to go forward with innovation and incentives and engagement of the agriculture sector in the US, in China, and globally. We're doing some of that work. We need to scale it up for sure. In the case of industrial N2O, though, there's a simple combination of standards plus kind of finishing touch on voluntary carbon markets that can realize that prize right now. So it's a different answer for the different sectors. We're doing work on both and appreciate the question. On the broader question of kind of how this relates to energy transition and a suite of other technologies. I think it's a bit beyond the scope of what we can cover today, but certainly we are equally committed as U.S. government to energy transition. That is clear. And today we're just talking about the other half of the current climate problem, which is the non-CO2 piece, and N2O as part of that. Of course, we're also dealing with methane. I will just note on methane that I have the privilege to co-chair the Climate and Clean Air Coalition on behalf of U.S. government, previously with Ghana, now with Brazil. And the CCAC brought us the global methane assessment back in early 2021, which we then built on to create the Global Methane Pledge, which now has 157 countries acting to cut methane at least 30% by 2030. We need similar mobilization to tackle N2O when this CCAC report comes out in October this year, because it is the forgotten greenhouse gas, and we have to remember it and do something about it before those emissions double and we deal with all the attendant problems for climate, for the burden on future carbon dioxide removal requirements, and also for ozone depletion. So lots of reasons to get geared up to tackle the industrial N2O and to get creative to tackle the agricultural N2O through incentives and engagement and innovation. Thanks.
So we also do still have our two online experts available if you have questions for them. I see two questions here. Let's start with the man in the blue shirt, Phil, and then. Okay.
Thank you. Phil McKenna, Inside Climate News. I'm wondering, what is the current status of abatement equipment that was installed under the CDM at adipic acid plants in China? If they're offline, are they being brought back online, and what is the impact, cumulative impact of all of that equipment?
Phil, you have some of that?
Thanks, Phil. I would say currently ClimeCo, all of the 4 facilities that we have under contract never had abatement. So we are trying to get more data, Phil, on the technologies that exist. Have they been turned off? You know, data transparency is something that we're working with all of our China counterparts. But right now, I can't give you the exact information with respect to the projects and if they're running under the old CDM days. But you saw from the professor, between 07 and 012, there were a lot of projects that came online. And I can certainly, based on some of the data that I have, a lot of those certainly were mothballed or offline once the CER prices dropped so low. I think that's one of the reasons why, you know, when we had brought the Climate Action Reserve protocol and did a work group in China to make sure that we could bring our North American protocol to China to tighten up the standards. That was a big focus, was to bring that level of quality and some of the lessons learned from the CDM days. But Phil, I think we're still trying to get that data. So maybe some of the professors on the call have that.
I see Professor Hu or Professor Lin, do you have additional information on what we know about the status of those installed abatement equipment?
Okay. As I understand that the most difficult thing right now is the catalyst issues. So I was told by someone, and methodology or equipment is not so important, but only the catalyst they need to buy from some importers. So it's quite like costly. So as I understand it, that's the most challenge right now for some of manufacturer. That's my answer for this question.
Just to add, as part of the working group that came from the Sunnyland Statement last fall, which is now being led by John Podesta, who you just heard from, we are engaging on this non-CO2 mitigation opportunity in both countries in a very in-depth way. And you will have seen that just a couple of months ago, when Special Envoy Liu was in Washington, D.C., meeting with John Podesta, we did a readout from that meeting. We listed this set of crucial superpollutant non-CO2 topics in that readout. We called on the world to join for a summit on superpollutant non-CO2 greenhouse gases at COP29 in Baku in just a few months' time. And we are doing the work at a technical level to wade through these kinds of details. It's still early days, but this is exactly the purpose of this kind of roll up your sleeves work together bilaterally is to solve practical problems and cut emissions quickly in the two countries that are the biggest economies in the world and that have the largest emissions still in the world. And so that's the work of the Sunnyland Statement Working Group.
Thank you, Rick. I see there's one question here and one here. Let's take both of those together.
Okay. Hi there. My name is Lily Pike, reporter with Foreign Policy. I had two questions. First for Bill. My question is, given your experience in the US implementing these projects, are there different challenges operating the projects in China? You referred to some data issues and transparency issues. So I'm curious how you're working through those. My second question is for Professor Jianxin and Rick. It's about the diplomatic side of this, basically beyond the voluntary carbon markets approach. Are there any other solutions you're pushing for, whether that's regulation in China or target setting at a certain level? If you could speak to some of those details. Thank you.
Yeah. And
Okay, I'll first touch on the data transparency.
take the-
Oh, okay, please. Okay.
Hi, Zach Coleman with Politico. For Rick, I mean, you know, you've mentioned Sunnylands, you mentioned Global Methane Pledge. A lot of these are Biden administration initiatives. There is an election coming up. A lot of this cooperation with China is built on a worldview that they can be engaged. How durable is this strategy if it's not a Biden-Harris administration?
All right, Bill, let's start with you, and then Rick, and then Professor.
Data transparency, as a scientist, that's absolutely everything. And probably one of my largest fears as we took the ClimeCo brand into Asia Pacific, and we're in Asia Pacific for us includes India and other countries as well. So we always talk about MRV, monitoring, reporting, and verification, and the protocols. If you're able to look at the Climate Action Reserve protocol, you'll see how tight the MRV requirements are, which really includes continuous 1 minute average N2O in and out of a technology, Fourier transform infrared, non-dispersive infrared, all of this technology that's installed, real-time mass flow meters for airflow. So our contracts with our China counterparties mandate that not only do we help install and design those systems, but we also have data transparency with respect to real-time monitoring data off of them. And I think this is the biggest thing. I mean, we're sourcing, building out some of our Singapore team that's working in China with engineers and expertise from China to make sure that they're overseeing the data and can spot check the data. So, more to come, but certainly the MRV requirements and the protocol are very, very tight. And for ClimeCo to put our brand on it, it has to be.
So on the question of which tools to use to cut industrial N2O, the answer is whatever it takes to get it done quickly. And I think you've heard from the speakers already a really nuanced and important discussion of how that works in practice, which is that standards can take you quite far, often to sort of a 90% reduction level. And then you need a kind of finishing touch from voluntary carbon markets to get to 99 or near zero in some cases. It'll be different in a China context than in the US context. It'll be different in different states in the US and in different subsectors of industrial N2O. But for us, it's just a pragmatic question of getting the job done, getting to near zero industrial N2O as quickly as possible in both countries and globally. And I think we're heartened by the success where in a matter of months will be over 50% reductions in the United States on overall industrial N2O through a combination of these mechanisms, both standards and voluntary carbon markets. We're going to keep at it, be creative, get it done pragmatically and quickly. And then we're going to engage with China on a similar basis in a similar spirit of practicality. When we look forward, we've got a lot to do, and these questions are complicated. Industrial N2O is one of the easiest topics to tackle globally. And we are heartened by what we have in the Sunnyland Statement, its working group, its subgroup on non-CO2 superpollutants. We're heartened by the fact that US and China hosted the first non-CO2 summit at COP28. Vice President Harris was there to announce, among other things, over $1 billion in new catalytic funding for methane under the Global Methane Pledge at COP28 in 1 year's time that was pulled together, including from private sector, governments, and also philanthropy. And we're busy putting that to work on cutting things like oil and gas methane. There's $255 million now at the World Bank and the gas flaring and methane reduction partnership that was mobilized for COP28. And now we need to put that to work in places like Turkmenistan, the 5th largest oil and gas methane emitter in the world. We need to do standard setting on oil and gas methane in China, which is the 6th largest oil and gas methane emitter in the world. We need to deal with coal methane standards, which we're engaging on through the Sunnyland Statement and its non-CO2 subgroup. So there's a lot of work to do. This work takes time, and we are enthusiastic that that over coming years, we can make a huge difference. I can't speak to what the other team would do or not do.
Thank you for that. So we do just want to see if Professor Hu or John or Dr. Lin wanted to speak a little bit more in terms of some of the work going on in China.
Okay, again, I may say first, and then Professor Lin Zhang, you can add something more. Dealing the question about the mechanism of how to reduce the N2O in the industrial sector. As you know, China is moving, I will say, very carefully, use the emission trade and the and also the voluntary carbon emission reduction methodology. It's so far the carbon emission trade. The very important sector is the energy sector. That's the first sector, and so far the only sector they listing in the carbon emission trading system. And but very good news. Just last few months, but this is not a finish. It's still ongoing. The PFC from the aluminium industry is put in the second sector put in the carbon emission trade market. So just the second one, the second emission, the second sector. So I will say this is very good news for non-CO2 emission reduction. And this is one thing. And secondly, the government just renew the voluntary emission reduction methodology and regulation. That's 3 months ago. So, and this is also new. As you know, we used to have a CCER, it's, you know, the Chinese voluntary reduction methodology dealing with HFC 23 and some other sector. So I'm not sure what's the next step, but I think it is at least the regulation basis, as I mentioned in my presentation, is sort of is ready. And so it's very important is how we make the priority and told the decision makers which sector, like N2O emission from the industrial sector should be one of the priority. I think it's very important. Everybody say my sector is very important. So, but at least from my view, N2O from the industrial sector, I will say it's cost effective and also easy to implementation. That's my answer. Thank you.
I just add a couple of comments. I think the title of this workshop is put this very appropriately. This is an overlooked opportunity. I really commend all the people on this panel and in the room, putting a bright spotlight on this issue, both in terms of opportunity and cost abatement. I think especially given Rick's engagement with the Chinese counterpart, including that into an official statement, I think that's very meaningful and holds great promise. Even in the industrial sector, when China started focusing its attention, even though it's difficult to scale up, there are actually quite meaningful reduction. Fertilizer application has peaked in around 2020. It's started going down. That leads to less N2O emission from agriculture sector. I believe that by highlighting the very concrete opportunities, those specific plants in China, I think China could both improve its mitigation actions and also sharing more data on those issues.
Questions, I think in the interest of time, we are going to thank our panelists. Thank you very much for all of the information and insights. Thank you so much. Let you return to your seats. And it gives me great pleasure to invite now to the podium Manish Bapna, who is the president and CEO of the Natural Resources Defense Council. He joined NRDC as president and chief executive officer in August 2021. And NRDC, prior to joining NRDC, he had leadership roles focused on scaling solutions at the intersection of the environment and human development. And I think in the interest of time, I'm going to hand it over to you. Like you sing your praises.
Thank you so much, Debbie. It's great to be in a room with such a vibrant, stimulating conversation on N2O. It wasn't that long ago when we couldn't fill a room on carbon. And it is great to see how much progress has been made and how much more we still have to do. I just want to take a couple of minutes here at the end just to make 4 points that I think came up in the conversation in the last hour and a half. Fairly obvious ones, but useful, I thought, as a way to help close out today's incredibly important event. The first, which everyone in this room knows, but still worth underscoring the importance of superpollutants, right? We already have seen 1.5 degrees of warming in a 12-month period this past year, right? That is a shocking reflection that we are already bouncing around that threshold. We know that a lot of that is because of carbon, but we know that non-carbon gases matter dramatically. Methane, fluorinated greenhouse gases like HFCs, black carbon, tropospheric ozone, and of course, N2O. We heard earlier today that if you look at just CO2, you're only dealing with half the problem. I think Gabby's written a great paper on this in PNAS that everyone should read if you haven't. We heard about how N2O is 5% of the warming to date. The CCAC is coming out with an N2O assessment in October. Rick and others are organizing a COP super pollutant summit, which is not a gathering of the worst polluters in the world, but is an effort to try to tackle those other non-CO2 pollutants. So huge, huge need to focus on super pollutants. I want to pick up also just a final point on that David made, which is this is not just about the carbon cycle, it's also about the nitrogen cycle and how we rethink and fix that, which is out of whack, and how we think about not just a new carbon economy, but a new nitrogen economy. So there's a lot there that is worth just kind of focusing on. The second kind of finding is the incredible opportunity around industrial N2O. We heard a little bit of business as usual. You look at global N2O production, I believe if I got the numbers right, increasing by 55% in 2030 relative to 2015 numbers. So no plan of attack, significant growth in this super pollutant. We also heard it's the low-hanging fruit, right? John Podesta spoke about how roughly 80% of the abatement potential was under $20 a ton of carbon equivalent. We heard some of our colleagues from China talk a little bit about how the economics could be quite a bit less. We heard also about the co-benefits, right? It isn't just about the carbon, it's also about ozone, and it's also about NOx. So these co-benefits make the argument for this that much more compelling, right? And we learned that if you look at the US and China, that's 80% of the challenge. And so the opportunity, the fruit is a big fruit. It's not only low-hanging, it's large, 200 million metric tons in 2030. And this builds off of ongoing conversations that the US and China have been having, most recently evidenced in the Sunnyland Statement. So this is a big opportunity. The fruit is large, it's low, it's ripe, right? Okay, so third point. We have to think about a suite of policies and actions to tackle N2O. It is both about regulations and markets, right? We know that industrial N2O, N2O more broadly, there's a lot we could do with regulation. In the United States, we heard a lot from Ali and John about other efforts to tackle industrial N2O here. Our Chinese colleagues talked about quota management systems in China. The point here is that this isn't about just markets. There's a big role to play on regulation. If I understood David, not David, I'm sorry, Bill spoke a little bit about the baseline being somewhere around 90%, and then how you think about the remainder for markets. So getting that design right and thinking about the complementary role of both regulations and markets in the US, in China, is a big part of how we get this right. And I think for us at NRDC, kind of a strong belief that there's a lot of lifting that can be done with robust regulation, but maybe you can't get all the way there with regulation. And that's where high integrity kind of VCM or markets can play an important role. So something to take a look at, but a recognition that both are needed. And then the fourth kind of point I want to make is, how do you get those markets designed right is a big part of how this works. What can we learn from earlier experiences in the United States and China around what worked or what did not work? There were a number of questions raised about CDM and what lessons we could learn from that. And then as we think a little bit about what high integrity VCM looks like, what John Podesta was saying earlier, there are conversations or a set of questions both on the supply side. How do you prove that the reductions are additional, permanent, that there isn't leakage? How do you think about the MRV systems to make sure that those credits are real and permanent and durable? But equally important, and this is kind of an important part of the conversation, how do you get the demand side for those credits set, you know, kind of designed well? And that's a live, active conversation right now. What does a company who's buying these credits need to do in their own value chain on scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, before we give them a social license to purchase offsets to go above and beyond what they need to do in their own value chains? So how we design these markets, incredibly important to give the credibility for that funds to flow over the long term. So super pollutants matter. Industrial N2O, kind of low-hanging, large, ripe fruit. The US and China being critical for that. A recognition we need both regulations and markets, and how you design that important, but a lot of the water carried by regulation. And then for the market side, what have we learned and how do we design that right so we can really build something that'll be exciting, that'll be durable, that will actually enable us to realize this incredibly important opportunity before us. I want to close with a little science. So if I wasn't here working in this space, I would have been an astronomer. 9 years ago, there was a very famous discovery. Does anyone remember what happened on this date in 2015? What was that? Close. First time that we discovered a similar sized planet like the Earth in a habitable zone. Kepler 452b. Good news is, if we screw up, we have somewhere to go. The bad news is that it's 1,400 light years away. So just a reminder about how important it is to get all of this right. Join me in a huge round of applause for our speakers, our panelists, and for the organizers. Thank you very much. Right. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me turn it over to John. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Thank you, Manish. And thank you to all of our other speakers and panelists, Bill, Rick, David, Professor Hu, Chong Lin, and Gabby for moderating, of course, John Podesta and Ali Zaidi. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And please remember to check out N2O-action.org to follow along with Climate Advisors' efforts to make sure N2O is no longer a forgotten greenhouse gas.